for the impression to even show up. So versus leaving a footwear impression over on a bank counter, a suspect goes over a bank counter and leaves a footwear impression, this type of surface is not going to easily leave a footwear impression.
Was your job made more difficult in terms of the overlapping nature of what you were seeing?
Yes, we certainly, as I mentioned before, there's a step on top of a step. This is not a foot staying in one location, pushing down. The footwear impression is either stomping or it's bouncing up and down on the skin.
All right, I'm going to show you then.
It's moving.
What's moving?
The foot. The foot is not staying in the same spot throughout the impression.
Is that because the skin moves as well? I mean, if you put pressure downwards or upwards, does the skin move as well?
Yeah, it's possible.
This is 173. Now, did there come a point in time where you were provided a pair of shoes or a test pair of shoes to make some impressions with and then compare to photographs?
Yes, I was.
Did you tell the police to bring you these shoes?
No.
So at some point the police bring you a pair of shoes and ask you to make some impressions at the bottom of these for comparison?
Correct.
And then can we show Craig the bottoms of those shoes, which is going to be 174? This is the bottom of those shoes?
Yes.
And
Tread design.
let me ask you this. Does the top of, whether they're blue on top or black on top or white on top, does that change what's on the bottom of those shoes?
I've never seen a shoe that the uppers makes the bottom, the tread design look different.
And then Craig, could we show then the impression for the left shoe, which is going to be 175? So then this is, I guess, like we call a photocopy then of your transparency. Is that right?
This is actually probably just a photocopy of the test impression.
Okay, so you put the shoe down and you get
a paper photocopy of that test impression, yes.
All right, and then can we also show the right, just to show the jury, which is going to be 176? All right. In this case, were you able, using the two photographs we showed the jury earlier, to make some comparison or to make an assessment as to the similarity of this with those pictures on April's face?
Yeah, I actually would take the transparency and overlay it to the questioned photograph. And when I did that, I found areas of the tread design that would correspond in. What I found out from doing this examination, I thought a herringbone was a herringbone, but what I learned is, first of all, the angle of the herringbone will vary, whether it's 90 degrees, whether it's 45 degrees, whether it's 120 degrees. I also found out that the herringbone will come to a rounded end, it'll come to a pointed end, so there's some differences. Also, I found the length of the herringbone will differ, and also sometimes the herringbone is actually divided, where it's not continuous. So there was actually a lot that I learned through doing this case.
Craig, could you display People's Exhibit 129? Now, there's a herringbone, and this is 129. There's a herringbone pattern in part of this shoe. Do you see that?
Yeah.
And you just spoke a moment ago about a herringbone is not a herringbone. Does the length of the down and the up, does that matter?
Yes, it does.
Does the width of the, I guess you'd call it sole, the spacing matters as well as the rubber itself between the spacings?
Yes.
And then, now down here, I'm seeing what looks like wear.
Correct, yep, that's where the shoe.
Ideally, somebody like you would probably rather have something like this where there's wear on the shoe.
It would be much easier to identify a shoe like that, yes.
In fact, in this actual shoe, correct me if I'm wrong, you excluded this shoe as being a possible donor to those impressions on her neck.
Yes, I did.
Were you able to exclude the test impressions then from those Jordan Flight to Powers, the new pair of shoes that were given as a representative example?
I was not.
And what did you conclude?
I could not eliminate those as being the source. of the Footwear Impressions on April Millsap.
There's a limited association that you spoke about before. Would that be your actual classification then in your laboratory report?
Yes, it's a level 4. It's a limited association.
Okay. In light of April's condition and where the impressions were, as well as the overlapping nature of the impressions, without having an actual shoe to compare, would you have expected to be able to have a higher level of association with a test or a representative sample?
No, I wouldn't.
Can you just again articulate why, please?
Because of the fact that, one, we're not gonna have the unique characteristics for identification. Two, we're not gonna have any wear pattern that's found on that shoe. So you're immediately, the best case scenario is you're looking a level 3, is those association of class characteristics, which I would probably need almost a full test impression to be able to determine that on skin. We're dealing with small partial impressions.
In this case, did you have one footprint from heel to toe on April that you could lay down your whole transparency over without crisscrossing?
No.
So you came to a level 4 association in this case?
Limited class characteristics association, yes.
Now, there were other shoes attributed to other people in this case that you did exclude, is that correct?
That's correct.
And by exclude, you indicated these shoes did not make these footprints in your expert opinion.
Correct.
There were some Nike shoes from Tim Perrell, some skater shoes from Alex Schultz, some Reeboks from Alex Schultz. Do you remember excluding those?
I remember I've excluded everything else that I looked at.
All right, so anything else you looked at?
Specific shoes.
All right. Any other shoes you excluded?
Correct.
But those Jordan Flight the Powers?
Correct.
Part of your job also then is to look at perhaps treadwear impressions, and by that I mean like tire tracks. Sometimes there might be a case where you have a very good tire track and you could compare. Is that also in your area of expertise?
Yes, it is.
Similar skills to looking at a footprint.
Yes.
In this case, were you able to identify any tire tracks or anything that seemed to come from the motorcycle test sample?
I received a few photographs. There was very limited detail, and I did not make any association to the known motorcycle tires.
Were you even able to make comparisons in each of those cases, or was there not enough detail?
I did try to make comparisons, but just the detail of the photographs was so poor. I think I made an inconclusive association.
Go ahead and have a seat again, and you can take that picture down. Yeah, I like it. I'll pass the witness across the page.
You know, can we take a second look? I'm not going to be using it unless you think you'll be using it in direct.
I don't. How do you want me to do it?
Just a little over. Just.
Move it a little bit. I don't want to disconnect that. Is that enough room?
Yeah, that's fine. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Okay. How are you?
Good. Now, let's start off with where Mr. Daly left off. As far as those motorcycle tracks not being being inconclusive, they were brand new tires, were they?
The tires from the motorcycle.
Right.
I do not believe they're brand new tires.
Okay. So I think you explained, or according to Mr. Daly's, questioning, that part of the reason you couldn't make an exact match here because these were new shoes. What was the excuse for not being able to make a match with the tires when they're not brand new?
Because the photographs were terrible.
Okay. Do you know if a different person took these photographs? I know you took some, right?
Yes, I did not take those photos. I do not know the source of those photos.
Okay. Well, those photos, are we talking about the motorcycle photos or the...
The motorcycle photos.
Now, in terms of the scale that you use, just so that we're clear, 1 is the strongest, correct?
Correct.
5 is the weakest or elimination, correct?
Correct.
And so you found what you consider low level or limited association, which you said was a 4, right?
Correct.
Okay, so just if we are talking in terms of percentages, that would be like 80% elimination, correct?
No.
Well, no, what I'm saying is if you use the numbers, if 5 is 100, right? 5 times 20 is 100.
Correct.
And it's if something's, it's 4 out of 5 not eliminated. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. Isn't that equal on a scale about 80%?
If we actually had the set of shoes that could have made the impression, but not with a test pair of shoes.
Okay, but sir, I don't want to talk about all the what ifs, because God knows there could be a lot of what ifs that would have changed things a lot. I want to talk about what is. In this particular case, you were given approximately 11 shoes, is that correct?
Correct.
And you totally eliminated approximately 10 of those, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that's 1 pair that's left. You could not eliminate them, correct?
Correct.
You also could not say that they're a match, correct?
That's correct.
So you use this scale that you have of 1 to 5 to try to come up with some
Right.
theory, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So on there, I suppose that the best for the prosecution would have been if it were 1, correct?
Correct.
And the worst for the defense would have been if it were a 5, correct?
The
Within
worst
that
for the
scale that you're
defense?
talking about in terms of association.
The worst for the prosecution.
No, you're saying that.
Oh, I'm sorry, okay. So the worst for the prosecution would have been a 5, right?
Correct.
Okay. And in this case, it's a 4, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, I know you don't like the figure 80%, but I mean, if you translate it mathematically, that's really what it boils down to, right?
Sure.
I'm sure?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you also indicated that you were given small partial impressions here, correct?
That's not what I was giving, that's what was on the body.
Well, that's
Correct.
what was on the body, but that's all you had to work with, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you were also given impressions on top of impressions, correct?
That's correct.
And it is your own position, as you indicated, the skin has a variable degree of elasticity to it, correct?
That's correct.
Yours might be more elastic or inelastic than mine, correct?
Yes.
And it could be to do with gender, age, just the lifestyle, the amount of lotion we put on, all sorts of things, correct?
Sure. Yes.
So that's a big variable, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you did indicate that there was lots of variables. As a matter of fact, coming into this case and looking at these things and trying to get a match, you said that you discovered how many variables there are, in fact, correct?
In the herringbone pattern,
In the
yes.
herringbone pattern,
Correct.
right? So you took small partial impressions, impression on top of impressions, with all the variables, and this is the closest that you could come was the association of a 4, correct?
Yes.
One second. Just so we're clear, this was a brand-new pair of shoes that you were given to test, correct?
That's correct.
And you indicated that despite the fact that the prosecutions alluded to perhaps black and white shoes, these were blue and white, but you found that makes no difference to your analyzing the tread pattern, correct?
The color of the uppers makes no difference to what the bottom of the shoe looks like, correct?
And these patterns, they differ from manufacturers to manufacturers too as well, correct?
That's correct.
So, and sizes differ as well, right? There's some
That's correct.
variances?
Yes.
So a size 12 of Nike could be different than a size 12 of Adidas or Jordans or K-Swiss, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and also the same with the patterns that, I mean, they may all call them herringbone, but they may be slightly different, correct?
That's correct.
And even within certain models of shoes, sometimes they're made in different countries, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if you have model 142 of a shoe, some could be made in Malaysia, some could be made in Bangladesh, correct? This first.
You're saying within the same shoe? I'm not sure about manufacture.
But it's not unheard of that these manufacturers use their names to get
Sure,
shoes made,
that
correct?
could happen.
We've all heard about kids making Nikes, right? Have you ever heard of that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you say, if I understand it correctly, sir, were you present at the autopsy?
I was.
Okay. And do you recall seeing any clump of hair missing from April's hair?
No.
None at all?
It wasn't something that I was looking for.
Okay, but you don't recall seeing any hair missing, correct?
No.
And you were looking at the hair because you indicated that part of the hair was on top of the pattern and it had to be moved at some point to look at some of the pattern and injuries. Is that correct?
At the scene, yes.
Okay. Oh, at the scene. Now, you indicated that it would take pressure to leave the kind of impressions. Would it take different amounts of pressure if you were leaving a mark on the face versus the neck versus the chest?
I'm not really sure of that answer.
But I mean, they're different compositions, right?
Potentially, yes.
Do you know, could these impressions have been made post-mortem after the young lady was deceased?
Judge, I guess I'm objective. I don't know that he has any medical background to, maybe he knows, I don't know. I guess I just haven't heard any foundation.
Do you know?
All right.
Yes or no, sir?
If the footwear impressions were made after the autopsy?
Well, no, not after the autopsy. Post-mortem meaning after the person became deceased. Is that possible?
I don't know, yeah.
Okay. And you don't know what order they were made in either, right? Whether top to bottom, left to right?
Correct. I don't know.
Is there any way that you could tell from coming to the scene and then later being at the autopsy and being intimately involved with this case, how long the impressions had been on the body or no?
No.
And just to reiterate, you learned a lot in this process investigating this from the shoes that you were provided and trying to match them up, correct?
About herringbone patterns,
About herringbone
yes.
patterns. Do you know if you know, do you know if certain teams use the same kind of football, same kind of footwear, like a basketball team at a school? Do they use like a uniform, the same type of shoes, or if you know?
I don't know.
I'm going to object unless he has any.
That's, how would he know?
I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, nothing further.
Thank you.
I guess just a couple of follow-up questions. First, were you checking, or was it your job to check April's follicles in her head to see if she had missed any hair or any had been pulled out of her head?
No.
There's some question and answer about 80%, and I understand if you divide 100 by 5 and then you use 5 categories, 20, 40, 60, you can count up to 100 by 20s, and 4 might correspond with 80. Is there any sort of state police, any of your lab reports or any policy, procedure, protocol, or anything where you've ever quantified anything 80% in any lab report you called something a level 4 association?
No, that scale's not used to give stats. It's just kind of a representation of where things might fall. So
do you have, so 80%, does that mean anything to you other than dividing 100 and taking the 4? Does that mean anything in this case to you?
no.
And that's all I have. Thank you.
Very briefly, Your Honor. How long have you been doing this? Maybe I missed that part, sir.
Footwear or trace evidence?
Footwear, sir.
Since 2003.
Okay, and during that time, we're talking about almost 13 years, correct?
About 12, 13 years,
12,
correct?
13
Yep.
years. Okay, during that time period, have you or any of your colleagues ever differed on this association scale? Have you ever sat there and said, okay, I think it's a 4, and somebody else may have said, I think it's more a 5 or a 3?
It can happen where there's, it's really up to the examiner's expertise.
So it is up to their expertise and also their subjective opinion within a certain parameters to indicate what it is, correct?
Yes.
So if you looked at something and said it's a 4, somebody else may say it's a 5, correct?
Typically, we err towards the size of caution. So if we would pick a level, we would pick a lower, less than.
Okay, but also in the
higher level.
perfect world, you would all pick the same level. But what I'm saying
Correct.
is that it is possible that you could have 3 different examiners and one could find association of 3, 1 of 4, and 1 of 5, correct?
I suppose.
Well, it's been your experience that others have differed with your conclusions,
It
right?
doesn't typically happen. Typically, the differences are between a 3 and a 4.
Okay, well, let's just say that there's a difference of 1, but there is differences, there is room for differences between 2 people that have similar training, experience, and are under the same laboratory conditions, correct?
Correct.
Thank you, nothing further.
I just have one follow-up now, and I won't be leaving this too long. In terms of the 3 and 4 and that, the 5 levels that you told the jury about, those are the levels of association, correct?
Correct.
And then you have a level of unsuitable, lacking sufficient detail, correct?
Correct.
And then you have a level of exclusion, right?
Right.
And then you have a level of inconclusive non-association, right?
Correct.
So you have those other 3 levels. The 5, just so we're all clear, are levels of actual association, right?
Correct.
All right, that's all.
Nothing further. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You're excused.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your next witness?
Jeffrey Summers, she's right here. Hi.
Ma'am, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth?
I do.
And Jennifer, how do you spell your first name
First name, Jennifer.
and your last name?
Summers.
Thank you. Speak loud.
And would you indicate where you're employed and what your job is?
I'm currently employed by the Michigan Department of State Police Forensic Science Division. I'm based out of the Sterling Heights Crime Laboratory and assigned to the biology unit.
And what is your job in the biology unit?
Basically, I receive evidence from police agencies that may be related to a crime, and my main role is to identify what bodily fluid may be present on those items, such as blood, semen, saliva, urine, feces, or skin cells. Try and identify what bodily fluid that is, and then either take cuttings or swabbings from that area and forward them on to our Northville laboratory for DNA to be performed.
And 2 of your colleagues in the DNA testing for the state police, Monica Barilski, you familiar with her?
Yes, I am.
Andrea Halverson-Young?
Yes,
And did they then work with some of the evidence that you sent on for further testing?
they did.
Talk about some of the ways that you try to obtain evidence that they can later then, because we're kind of doing this out of order for the jury, but we need to explain how that got to the DNA experts.
So again, basically I perform different kind of tests to identify what bodily fluid is present, and depending on the substrate or the item that I'm working with, I'll either take swabbings of that potential bodily fluid, or cuttings, so swabbings or cuttings, and then I will forward them onto our Northville laboratory. They will be itemized with the laboratory number, item number, and what is contained within that extraction tube that I send over to Northville, where then my colleague Monica analyzed those.
Is part of your job then to assess where and what parts of an item you're either going to swab or do a cutting from?
Yes.
And in this case, there are a bunch of lab reports that have been prepared by yourself and your colleagues. You have a number of lab reports in this case.
Yes, I do.
Do you recall how many?
I think around 14.
Okay. And those items then that were sent on for DNA testing, we would, assuming that they've already testified, we would have heard from your 2 colleagues, Ms. Barilski and Ms. Halverson-Young, about the results of those items.
Yes, correct.
Certain items you analyzed and did not send on. Is that also accurate in this case?
That is correct.
And I'm going to show you one and ask you about it because we already had some testimony from one of your colleagues. This is people's proposed 44. You can step down. I just want you to see this. Actually, it's already admitted 44. I'm sorry. Do you recall looking at this item? And if I reference this as 6A, item 6A in your lab reports, do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, and this got referred to earlier, and there was some question and answer by the judge with our witness. I'm going to show the judge this as well. There was some reference to that as a possible blood stain out at the scene on this piece of wood. Do you recall testing that to determine whether or not that red blotch was actually blood or not?
Yes, I did test it.
And what was it?
Deemed not blood.
Okay.
That stick.
I wanted to clear that up because that got referred to earlier as a blood drop. In fact, that's not a blood drop.
It is not.
All right. Something that looks like it might be.
Yes.
And you actually perform a chemical analysis on that to decide or to determine whether that might be blood?
I did.
If it was, what would you have done with it?
If it was, I would have probably taken a swabbing of that red stain there and forward that on to Northville for further DNA analysis. However, the chemical testing indicated that it was not blood, so I did not do anything further with that stain.
Okay. There were other swabs taken from some of the intimate areas of April, referring specifically to anal swabs. Do you recall looking at those?
Yes, I did.
And were you looking, what were you looking for?
Usually in a case like that, when we get an evidence collection kit.
She's got to keep her voice up.
Keep your voice up because there's no mic in front of you.
All right. Usually when we have samples that are inside an evidence collection kit, potentially related to a sexual assault, what the first thing I'm looking for is looking for the presence of seminal fluid or semen. And so I performed those tests on the anal swabs in this case.
And did you find any evidence of that?
No, I did not.
Okay. We also heard about some swabs that were from her vaginal area. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And there was a reference in there, and this reference stayed with it when it went to the DNA people about possible saliva. Do you recall that?
I do.
Can you indicate how that came to be included in the lab reports?
So again, I was looking at the vaginal swabs for the possible presence of seminal fluid, semen, and sperm cells. Those tested negative. So at that point, then I processed the vaginal swabs for the possible presence of saliva or amylase, which is an enzyme that is present in our saliva. It aids in digestion and breakdown of starch. So I performed that test, and I got a positive reaction for that. So that's why I took cuttings from the vaginal swabs and forwarded them on to my colleague at Northville, who I think you heard from earlier, for further DNA analysis.
All right. And she's already testified to what that analysis is. You didn't actually perform then to determine whether or not there was any other DNA there other than April's.
I did not perform the DNA, correct?
Okay. Craig, you can take that down. You go ahead. Do you know how many items you looked at in this case? Approximately?
I would say approximately 80 to 100.
And was there at least one item, for instance, the Raider motorcycle helmet that was swabbed more than once in an attempt to gain DNA evidence?
Yes, I did receive a couple items more than once for additional testing, correct.
Do you recall any other items that were more than once?
Some of the clothing, and I believe I received some of April Millsap's clothing back.
Okay. Her shorts in particular, do you recall that?
Correct, yes.
And
tank top, her underwear.
And in fact, on one of those, do you recall there being an indication of possibly urine on one of those clothing items?
Yes, I had initially, when I had it the first time, had tested a couple of April Millsap's articles of clothing for the possible presence of urine and got a positive reaction. At the time, I did not forward that on for DNA analysis on my initial round of DNA. I decided at a later date that maybe I would forward that on to Northville to see whose urine that may be in case it wasn't from April Millsap herself.
All right. And again, the results of that testing would have come from your two colleagues?
Correct.
Okay. Were you out at the scene the night April was found?
No, I was not.
Other members of your department were?
Correct.
And aside from the items that you've talked about, 80 to 100 items that you've looked for and tried to prepare to obtain DNA evidence, did you have any other part in investigating this case from your standpoint? Did you go to the autopsy?
No, I did not.
Were you part of any forensic photography that took place?
No.
Any fingerprint efforts?
No.
Yourself? Any Treadwear Impressions that some Eric Cervinak may have been involved in?
No.
Judge, could I have one moment? But I'll pass the witness. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Your Honor, we have no questions for this witness.
You are excused, thank you.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Judge, we don't have any other witnesses for today. Our final
Well,
witness.
you better go find some because I'm going to be there till 5.
Are you here till 5? I always have them.
Looks, I don't know what the docket will start tomorrow, let's see. See you tomorrow at 11. Have a great night. Please don't watch anything, listen to anything, talk to anybody about the case.
All right, the jury.
So, gentlemen,
Yes.
you'd like, got one more witness tomorrow?
Yes, very likely, one more witness.
Okay, and then